Unlike Ferrari, McLaren in Formula One has achieved the perfect full circle by winning the Miami Grand Prix last weekend. Exactly 1 year ago at the Miami International Autodrome in Florida, the Woking team led by former Ferrari race engineer Andrea Stella began establishing itself as the strongest on the grid. Now it has become unbeatable and seems to have a clear path towards another Formula One Constructors' Champions, and this time even a driver's title that will be decided by the internal battle between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. For now, we can take a closer investigation into the reasons that made the MCL 39 single-seater so unreachable in this start of the 2025 Formula One Championship, and more specifically in Florida. Let's start with a technical consideration related to the aeromechanics of the cars, also keeping in mind the race weekend at the Jeddah Corniche Circuit in Saudi Arabia. So, where does McLaren excel and where does the SF25 car struggle against its opponents? Basically, the aerodynamic setups of the cars in the last two races have been quite similar, aimed at medium-low downforce. What changed was the track layout, moving from a circuit dominated by medium-speed corners to one where lap time was built in the more technical, slower sections. A common factor was the long straights, where achieving high top speeds was crucial. In terms of setup and configurations, the biggest difference lies in stiffness and ride height. Unlike the Saudi Arabian track, at the Miami International Autodrome, the setups were softer and the cars were higher off the ground to allow a good roll angle in the slow sections. After all, the only point where aerodynamic load made a big difference was in the first corners of Sector 1, around the Hard Rock Stadium. From this perspective, it is easy to identify where McLaren made the difference, and where Ferrari, by contrast, struggled immensely: the slow corners. Specifically, the section between turns 11 and 16, including turn 17. Looking back at all the sessions over the past weekend, McLaren, especially on a single lap, never shined in Sector 1. Higher ride heights and a less stiff car did not allow it to compete with the Red Bull RB21 of Max Verstappen there. However, the rear end of the MCL 39 single-seater was very stable under traction, generating lots of grip without oversteer, and without exaggerating the slip angle. In Jeddah, the setups were stiffer to make the aerodynamics work, minimizing the papaya-colored car's strength in slow corners. That is why the gaps were smaller in Saudi Arabia, where air and track temperatures during the race were similar to those recorded in Miami. On American soil, McLaren enjoyed better camber recovery than its rivals, which allowed for superior rear tire temperature management. To give some numbers, in the second stint, when Max Verstappen got close to Oscar Piastri's times in the slow corners, he was still losing 0.3 seconds per lap. Ferrari's gap was nearly 0.6 seconds, which is clearly far too much to hope for a good result for the Maranello team. Moreover, McLaren's excellent thermal management of the tire compounds allowed Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri to push hard even in the first sector of the Miami circuit. Even without a car optimized for this part of the circuit, the tires coped better with lateral stress, again making them the fastest. In short, the Woking engineers and technicians hit the jackpot by setting up a car that was optimal in the slow sections, a trait that in Formula One did not limit speeds over the 300-kilometer race distance. McLaren's great versatility is what makes the difference. At the Jeddah Corniche Circuit, the low-speed corners, where traction and mechanical grip really matter, were just two, which is why the performance gap didn't widen too much. A similar scenario could play out again next weekend in the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at the Imola circuit. The Italian track, located on the banks of the Santerno River, in fact features only one true low-speed corner, the famous Variante Alta. Even at the Imola circuit, as expected, the world champion team should start as the favorite against Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. However, due to the track layout, the rivals should once again be, at least on paper, somewhat closer to the team led by Andrea Stella. Lately, Ferrari in Formula One is unfortunately laughable, but in another field it is going full throttle. Money. Yes, because if we take a look at the first quarter of 2025, the company shows growing revenues, with 1.8 billion euros more in profits compared to the first 4 months of 2024. As for net income, around 415 million euros went into the coffers, an increase of 18%. Naturally, Chief Executive Officer Benedetto Vigna is very pleased, but the mood when looking at the Maranello team is far from the figures flaunted in the previous paragraph. On the contrary, In sporting terms, the Maranello-based team is a disaster, precisely in a season where the goal was to aim for the Formula One title, to take that extra step and fight at the top of the highest category. And instead, here comes another disappointment that will hardly be erased during the current Formula One campaign. As Chief Executive Officer of Ferrari, we fully understand that at your level, a manager's success is certainly not tied to sporting results, but to purely financial dynamics. After all, the shareholders' meeting recently renewed its confidence in the top management of the prancing horse, re-electing both you and President John Elkann as executive directors of the company. Your presence in Miami was exclusively due to the need to celebrate the anniversary of the main commercial agreement between the Italian team and its title sponsor, Hewlett-Packard. The hope that you will understand what Ferrari represents for its millions of fans has now pretty much faded. That passion belongs mainly to those who will never be able to buy a road car from Maranello, except as a scale model. A group of people who can't even afford to buy their loved ones a team cap sold at the modest price of €125. Your absence, and that of the president, in the daily life of the team hurts. As the saying goes, the eye of the master fattens the horse. Unfortunately, the Ferrari horse is now emaciated. The absence of top management from the Formula One Commission meeting in Bahrain is a sign of disrespect. It is a sign of disrespect towards the fans and even towards the Ferrari employees themselves, who work tirelessly in order to compensate for the total absence of the owner. A deafening void. The presence of team principal Frédéric Vasseur at tables where political weight and influence within the organizational structure matter does not look like a delegation. It feels more like passing the buck. And there is another point which we want to emphasize. It would have been admirable to see a chief executive officer sensitive to his brand's image after the disgraceful performance of the Ferrari SF25 cars on track, even getting overtaken by Williams in the competitive pecking order at the Miami International Autodrome in Florida. Perhaps you should have raised your voice in your position and said something to the fans, because such a scenario is unacceptable from a team like Ferrari. Once again, the team principal of the Italian squad has given his version of events in a mix of cliches, weather-related hopes, such as rain dances not seen since the early 90s, and excuses that have little to do with the reality of the situation. And the chief executive officer in all this? Perhaps your mission ended when the veil was lifted on that awful livery created in tribute to the Hewlett-Packard Company. Once upon a time, Enzo Ferrari would give up his own color in the United States for political reasons, namely in protest against the Italian Federation. Today, all it takes is profitable commercial deals and limited edition clothing lines to fuel the marketing machine, which has also benefited from the arrival of Lewis Hamilton. By the end of the weekend, this is the bitter reality that millions around the world are struggling to digest.